May 29, 1943, RAF Alconbury, England. The air crackled with tense anticipation. 7 YB-40 flying fortresses of the 92nd Bomb Group's 327th Squadron sat poised on the hardstands. Their crews, conducting final checks, were about to fly their very first combat mission. These were no ordinary bombers. Bristling with up to 1650 caliber machine guns, these experimental gunships represented the Army Air Force's desperate answer to a single, bloody question: how do we solve the fighter escort problem? German defenses were tearing the 8th Air Force apart, and the YB-40 was supposed to be the solution. Instead, its debut would expose a fatal design flaw in the B-17 that had been killing American airmen since the first raids into occupied Europe. The catastrophic collision. The problem was simple in its mechanics but catastrophically lethal in its consequences. Inside the B-17's narrow fuselage, 2 waist gunners stood directly opposite each other, manning flexible 50 caliber guns through open windows on either side of the plane. Imagine the scene: $25,000 feet up, temperatures plummeting to 60 circ below zero. These men were encased in bulky sheepskin-lined suits, 38 text pound of flak armor, and parachute harnesses. In the chaos of a German fighter attack, they would repeatedly collide with one another while desperately trying to track the enemy. The result was disastrous. Oxygen lines disconnected, leading to hypoxia and death within minutes. Ammunition belts tangled, jamming guns at the exact moment they were needed most. Men were dying, not from enemy bullets, but from their own inability to fight back. All thanks to a fundamentally flawed aircraft design, the mathematics of death. The 18 months that followed would force one of the most vital design evolutions in military aviation. Through the bitter cost of combat experience, systematic analysis of losses, and rapid industrial change, the B-17 would transform from a vulnerable target into the most heavily defended bomber of World War II. Key modifications, especially the revolutionary staggering of the waist gun positions, saved thousands of lives and contributed decisively to achieving air superiority over Nazi Germany. In early 1943, the statistics painted a picture of unsustainable attrition. The 8th Air Force's research section found that the average B-17 survived only 11 combat missions before being destroyed. With a required combat tour of 25 missions, the probability of survival for a crew stood at a mere 27%. This translated into empty bunks in Nissen huts across East Anglia, personal effects boxes shipped home to grieving families, and replacement crews rushed into action faster than they could be properly prepared. The crisis had been escalating ever since the 8th Air Force began operations in August 1942. A theory, tragically proven wrong pre-war doctrine, developed at the Air Corps Tactical School, rested on the belief that amassed bomber formations, defensive firepower would make daylight, precision bombing viable without fighter escort. The self-defending bomber theory, untested in large-scale combat, this theory was now being proven tragically wrong. German fighter pilots, particularly in their formidable Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, had perfected tactics that exploited every weakness in the Flying Fortress's defenses. The waist gun positions represented the most glaring vulnerability. Designed in the late 1930s and tested only in peacetime, they were never subjected to the sustained hell over Germany. The B-17E and F models had 2 gunners, each manning a flexible 50 caliber Browning M2 through an open window about 2 by 3 feet. The fuselage was barely 10 feet wide at that point, with 2 men standing directly across from one another, trying to pivot and track a fast-moving enemy while weighed down by bulky gear. A collision wasn't an accident, it was a certainty. The conditions only made things worse. At $25,000 feet, the air routinely hit 60 circ below zero. A $200 text, $MEPRI slipstream howled through the open windows, flash-freezing exposed skin. Ice formed on everything. Gunners wore layer upon layer of gloves, silk, wool, leather, and finally, electrically heated mittens, yet still lost fingers to frostbite clearing gun jams with bare hands. A desperate interim solution. Combat reports from early 1943 were a litany of mounting failure. The first attack on Germany on January 27th saw gunners report severe interference. The March 6th raid on the Schweinfurt ball-bearing works saw multiple B-17s completely unable to defend against beam attacks because the waist gunners had tangled themselves up during violent evasive maneuvers. The YB-40 Program emerged in September 1942 as a hurried interim fix. With long-range escorts like the P-51 Mustang still in development, bombers penetrating deep into Germany were left defenseless once the short-range P-47 Thunderbolts turned back. Lockheed's Vega subsidiary converted standard B-17Fs into YB-40 gunships. The changes were sweeping. Second Sperry dorsal turret was installed. Twin gun mounts replaced the single. Waist guns. A Bendix chin turret was added under the nose. The bomb bay was converted to an ammunition magazine holding $11,000 rounds, extra armor plating, protected crew positions. The first 13 YB-40s arrived at Alconbury in early May 1943. Training immediately showed that doubling the firepower with twin mounts actually worsened the space problem. Gunners repeatedly collided and fouled their equipment during mock exercises. The combat debut on May 29th, targeting the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France, proved deeply disappointing. 7 YB-40s accompanied $96 standard B-17s. The heavily modified, ammunition-laden gunships, however, were unable to keep formation with the lighter standard bombers once they dropped their bomb loads. Most critically, the combat reports that poured in documented severe problems with crew coordination in the waist positions. Post-mission debriefings repeatedly revealed that gunners had been unable to effectively engage the German fighters, attacking from the beam, the side of the aircraft. Then came the tragedy of June 22, 1943, during the raid on the synthetic rubber plant at Heels, Germany. YB-40 serial number 425735 was destroyed after its waist gunners reportedly failed to provide effective defensive fire due to that same fatal issue. Mutual interference. The investigation confirmed this wasn't a fluke. It was a systemic failure. The race for a solution. These devastating after-action reports hit multiple commands simultaneously. At Wright Field in Ohio, the Air Technical Service Command began a deep analysis of the tactical failures. In Seattle, Boeing's chief engineer Edward Curtis Wells quickly assembled a team to study the combat data. Douglas Aircraft's Modification Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, started experimenting on actual planes. But the most significant work happened at the United Airlines Modification Center in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This center was established specifically to rapidly implement combat improvements, and they began systematically testing alternatives. The solution that finally emerged was brilliantly simple, yet revolutionary. Stagger the waist gun windows by moving the left window forward and the right window aft by approximately 3 feet. Each gunner was given their own dedicated operating zone. They could now track targets without colliding with their counterpart and feed their ammunition belts without tangling. The modification required minimal structural change to the fuselage, but promised a maximum improvement in combat effectiveness. The B-17G, a Fortress transformed. The first B-17 with the experimental staggered windows was combat tested in early July 1943. The results were immediate and dramatic. Gunners reported a significant increase in their ability to track and engage targets, and incidents of equipment interference dropped to nearly zero. But staggering alone wasn't the final answer. Gunners were still operating in open windows, exposed to the devastating slipstream and frigid cold. The complete final solution combined the staggered positions with enclosed windows featuring plexiglass panels and rotating gun mounts. This was the Cheyenne configuration, and it transformed the waist into a functional, habitable combat station. Douglas Aircraft implemented the staggered window mod, first on late production B-17F aircraft in August 1943. Boeing immediately incorporated the change into their brand new B-17G model, with the first one completed on August 30th. Lockheed Vega quickly followed suit. The B-17G was more than just a fix for the waist position. It incorporated nearly every combat lesson learned during the bloody air battles of 1943. A Bendix chin turret provided crucial frontal defense. The tail position was redesigned with larger windows and improved fields of fire. These modifications, together, transformed the Flying Fortress into the most heavily armed bomber of the war, proving their worth. The urgency of the moment was reflected in production statistics. Boeing's Seattle plant would build $8,680 B-17Gs. Douglas built $2,395, and Lockheed Vega manufactured $2,250. Every single one of these aircraft, incorporated the staggered waist window design alongside the other. Improvements at combat reports from the autumn of 1943 quickly documented the effectiveness of this transformation. During the October 8th attack on Bremen, B-17Gs with the modified waist positions claimed significantly more fighter kills than the older F models still flying. Crucially, they suffered fewer losses to beam attacks, exactly what the modifications were designed to prevent. The infamous October 14, 1943, Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt saw 60 B-17s lost out of 291 dispatched. Yet analysis showed that the newer B-17G models suffered proportionally lower losses than the older F models. The defensive improvements were proving their worth, even in the deadliest air battles. The German side noticed too. Luftwaffe after-action reports confirmed the American modifications were having an impact. Major Hans Philipp, commanding Jagdgeschwader 1, noted in October 1943 that American bombers had become noticeably more difficult to attack. Victory through adaptation. The B-17G's legacy with the staggered waist positions. The guns now delivered disciplined and accurate fire. Gunners could track enemy fighters smoothly through their entire attack approach. This forced the Germans to change their strategy entirely. They developed the heavy Werfer Granit 21 rocket mortar for standoff attacks and created heavily armored Sturmbach assault fighters specifically to absorb fire and smash through B-17 formations. The very fact that the Luftwaffe needed specialized weapons demonstrated just how effective the American modifications had become. By December 1943, this transformation was affecting strategic planning. General Ira Eaker reported to General Henry Arnold that the modifications had materially improved their ability to conduct deep penetration strategic operations. The 8th Air Force could now plan missions knowing their bombers had significantly improved survivability. A shift in the balance of power, the impact extended far beyond the hardware. Training curricula at gunnery schools were immediately revised. At Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona, instructors noted that the staggered positions finally allowed gunners to apply deflection shooting techniques effectively. This vital innovation even influenced other aircraft. The B-24 Liberator incorporated similar staggered positions in its late models, and the upcoming B-29 Superfortress benefited by using remotely controlled turrets, which eliminated crew exposure entirely. The cumulative effect was undeniable. January 11, 1944, saw 600 B-17s attack German aircraft factories. Despite an incomplete fighter escort, losses remained manageable, and the newer G model showed remarkable survivability. February's Big Week operations proved the strategic impact. Over 3,000 bomber sorties struck German production, and despite fierce Luftwaffe opposition, losses were sustainable. The improved defenses decisively shifted the attrition balance. Lieutenant General James Doolittle, taking command in January 1944, recognized that the modified B-17Gs could better defend themselves. He freed the escort fighters to pursue the German interceptors aggressively rather than staying glued to the formations, a combination that proved devastating to the Luftwaffe. On March 4, 1944, during the first American daylight raid on Berlin, the B-17G's reputation was cemented. The 95th Bomb Group, fully equipped with the new models, lost only 3 aircraft while claiming 17 German fighters destroyed, despite facing 200 enemy planes. The fruits of sacrifice by the spring of 1944, the 8th Air Force could maintain sustained operations. The ability to launch 1,000-bomber raids with acceptable losses meant the systematic destruction of German industrial capacity became a reality. Critical strategic efforts like the oil plan and the transportation plan were viable because the bombers could survive the missions required. The D-Day operations in June 1944 showcased the final transformation. The 8th Air Force flew over 2,000 bomber sorties supporting the invasion, yet lost only 26 bombers from all causes. The B-17G had become a reliable, powerful weapon platform. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe faced an impossible equation. American bombers were harder to kill, while American production replaced any losses immediately. The modifications had created a deadly cycle for Germany. Better defenses meant more bombers survived, forcing Germany to commit more fighters, resulting in even more German losses. The human dimension became profoundly clear in the tour completion statistics. In early 1943, Completing 25 missions seemed like a miracle. By mid-1944, crews were routinely completing 35 mission tours, as their probability of survival had more than doubled. A lasting legacy. German technical intelligence itself provided validation in August 1944, examining a crashed B-17G and noting that the offset waist positions provided effective beam defense. The accumulated modifications had transformed the aircraft from a vulnerable target into a formidable opponent. The relentless production continued, peaking at 16 B-17Gs daily from Boeing's Plant 2. This industrial ability to rapidly implement improvements created a weapon system that evolved faster than the enemy could adapt. The B-17G even successfully engaged German jet fighters in October 1944. Despite the Me-262's speed advantage, the improved conventional defenses damaged several jets, proving they remained relevant against revolutionary technology. The Christmas Eve mission of 1944, the war's largest airstrike, saw proportional losses remain lower than the small, disastrous raids of early 1943. The final bombing mission on April 25, 1945, saw B-17Gs attack Czech arms factories without a single loss. The modifications had worked. The combat lessons had been applied. The investment in blood had paid dividends in victory. Post-war analysis confirmed that B-17 evolution, especially the defensive position improvements, materially contributed to achieving air superiority. Financially, the value was staggering. $20 million in modifications prevented the loss of $800 aircraft worth $190 million, plus the invaluable trained crews. The return on investment exceeded $10 to $1, as General Carl Spaatz famously said. The B-17G was designed not in factories but in combat. Every improvement came from the crews who identified weaknesses through terrible experience. The staggered waist windows and other modifications transformed a flawed bomber into a war-winning weapon. It's a testament to American capacity for rapid adaptation based on battlefield feedback. Today, when visitors see one of the few airworthy B-17Gs, they notice those offset windows and learn the true story. Simple modifications, profound results, victory through adaptation.